Was Captain America, Superman, and Batman bankrolled by the US government? Hey y'all, and welcome back to Comics, Propaganda, and Politics, a series in which I talk about comic books and how they relate historically to propaganda campaigns and political movements. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the golden age of comics and the roles our favorite superheroes played in World War II. I've already made videos talking about how the Captain America comics and Batman serial justified the otherization and racism towards innocent Japanese folk during World War II. And I've talked about how Superman comics aided in the proliferation of war bonds, and how those war bonds would be used to build super heinous things like nuclear weapons. But instances of racism, war bond sales, and American exceptionalism were not mutually exclusive to these three characters. Instead, it was ever present in the industry. But why was that? Well, that's because of something called the Writers' War Board, or the WWB. This was a private organization that aimed to set regulatory guidelines for how the media should portray war-related topics. Oh, and despite being a private organization, the WWB was actually funded by the United States government, essentially turning it into an unofficial government program. And of course, a big site the WWB had in its crosshairs was comic books, because comic books were a very easy way to disseminate information and propaganda. And guess what? A lot of the racist imagery we saw in these comic books came from the guidelines of the WWB. And ironically enough, the WWB was actually worried that comics weren't racist enough. They were staunch advocates for a more uniform disavowalment of German and Japanese people as a whole. You see, in the eyes of the WWB, the Axis powers weren't the enemy. Instead, the German and Japanese people as a whole were deserving of complete and total otherization. So when we start to think back about these Captain America comics and the Batman TV show, it starts to make sense why there was a seemingly unified front when it came to racism. It was essentially because the WWB told them to do that, because cooperating with the WWB was seen as a patriotic obligation. But on top of that, rationing key goods during wartime made it difficult for the distribution of comics. This is because there was limited access to things like wood pulp, a key resource used to make comic books. However, cooperating with the WWB guaranteed that publishers would have access to these key resources so they could print more comics. It's kind of crazy to think about the fact that a government program masquerading as a private organization was able to manipulate the industry into doing its dirty work. But that doesn't happen a day, right? It's not like the comic book industry has an unholy alliance with the military-industrial complex, but maybe that's a video for another time. For now, that's the video. As always, hope y'all enjoyed. Thanks for watching.